When the two men broke into our house, I thought it was a mistake. A robbery. Wrong address. But then I heard my father's voice, calm, deliberate, say, "Take her. She's useless anyway." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a break-in. It was a handoff. They always said I looked like my mother, which might be why he couldn't look at me for too long, especially in the mornings when the kitchen light was too honest. He'd mutter things into the milk carton, half asleep, but the words never softened with sleep. They came out raw, shaped like blame. I'd sit on the edge of the counter, picking at dry cereal, waiting to be acknowledged, but he'd just walk past me like I was part of the floor plan. "You leave the door open again?" he asked, even though we both knew I hadn't. That was how it started most days. School was quieter than home, which isn't how it's supposed to be, but I liked it that way. I didn't talk much unless I had to, and when people asked about my weekend, I'd say something safe like, just laundry, or watched a show, even though we didn't have cable and the washing machine had been broken for 2 months. My English teacher, Mrs. Halverson, once told me I had an old soul, and I remember blinking at her for a second, because old didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like something I'd become too early, something she meant to sound kind. By the time I got home, the house always smelled like something half-cleaned, bleach and microwave grease, and the lights were off even if he was inside. He hated overhead lights, said they made the place feel like a hospital. I came through the front because the back door stuck, and the moment I closed it, I heard his voice, low, frustrated, on the phone. "Yeah, she's still here. What do you want me to do? Throw her out tonight?" I didn't move, just stood with my fingers still curled around the knob, wondering who he was talking to, wondering if he meant me. Later, over reheated chili and the sound of some courtroom show he always fell asleep to, I tried to ask him about my school trip, whether I could go, just a form with a signature. He didn't answer right away, just chewed like the question annoyed his jaw. "Ain't got time to be signing things every day. You know that trip's just for rich kids to feel better about themselves," he muttered, like that was supposed to be the end of it. I watched his fork scrape the bowl, the same spot over and over, like he was trying to erase something. He never hit me. He made sure to remind me of that. "You got food, don't you? Roof over your head. Some girls would kill for that," he said once, after throwing my backpack across the room because I left the hallway light on. His words always arrived like they were gifts I wasn't grateful enough for, wrapped in guilt, handed over like I owed him a thank you for not doing worse. I started keeping my things in one corner of my room, folded and zipped, not because I planned to leave, but because it made me feel like I could. When he wasn't home, the air felt different, like the house breathed easier. I'd eat cold soup from the can and sit on the floor with my back to the heater, listening to the pipes click. I'd write things down I couldn't say aloud, not even to myself, things like, "He doesn't hate me. He just doesn't know what to do with me." But even that felt too kind. Some nights, when he came in late, smelling like cheap cologne and tired lies, I'd pretend to be asleep just to avoid whatever version of him walked through the door. The first time I heard the name Mara, I was supposed to be doing homework, but the walls were thin and his voice always got louder when he drank. "Once she's out of the way, we can have some peace," he said. The words rolled around in my head for days. I didn't ask questions. I just listened better. I started keeping my phone near me all the time, recording things. Not for revenge, but for remembering. Sometimes, you don't even realize what you're documenting until it all lines up, until the puzzle pieces start shaping something you didn't want to see. That night, the window shattered at 9:13. I know the exact time because I was writing in my notes app and the screen froze. Two men, gloves on, faces covered, voices already shouting. I didn't scream. I didn't move. But I heard him. I heard his voice loud, panicked, but not for me. "You can take her," he shouted, not even pointing, just stepping back. "Just take her and leave us alone. She's nothing to us." Not me. Us. Like I was already gone. Like I never mattered. And even in the chaos, even in the blur, I knew this wasn't random. This was permission. If this story pulled you in, if you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own home, like, subscribe and drop a comment. Your voice matters here. And there's more to come. The sirens came faster than I expected, lights washing over the living room walls like some kind of warning I didn't understand. And one of the men looked straight at me before he dropped the knife on the floor and put both hands up like this wasn't what he signed up for. My father was already outside, waving down the cops like he'd just saved our lives, voice cracking as he yelled about a break-in, about strangers, about fear, but he didn't look at me once. I stayed where I was, hands clenched, feet rooted to the tile, face burning cold. Inside, the officers moved slow but careful, clearing each room, asking questions I didn't answer, not because I was scared, but because it felt like talking would make something worse. My sweatshirt was wet from the spilled water glass, my back still pressed against the kitchen counter, and I remember one officer, a younger one, kneeling to my level, eyes steady, like he was trying to see past what I wasn't saying. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, and I shook my head, not because they didn't try, but because I was still stuck on what my father had offered. He came back in, suddenly louder, hands flying as he tried to control the room. "She leaves the door unlocked. She doesn't listen. They must have seen her alone through the window," he said too fast, like rehearsed panic, and the officer next to me turned slightly, brows tightening. "You were in the house with her, sir?" the officer asked, and my father hesitated for half a beat too long, then nodded, slow, as if remembering. I watched him lie, smoother than he'd ever been with me, and all I could think was, he knew they were coming. He didn't stop it. They separated us not long after, an officer walking me toward the hallway with a voice like gravel and warmth, while another pulled my father toward the porch, where the red and blue lights still flickered against the windows. I sat in a narrow room with a flickering lamp and a ticking wall clock, breathing in short bursts, my sleeves pulled down to cover the shakes. The door clicked, and then the young officer came in again, sat across from me, no notebook out, just his hands folded on the table. "Can I ask you something, Ray?" he said gently, and I nodded. "Did your dad offer you to them?" he asked, not like an accusation, more like he already knew the answer. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then said, "He told them to take me." Said I was nothing. The words didn't sound real until I said them out loud, and something behind his eyes changed, like he'd heard things like this before but still never got used to them. "Did you feel like that was the first time he meant it?" he asked. I wanted to say it was, I wanted to lie, but I shook my head instead. He leaned back, just slightly, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny recording device, the kind I'd seen in detective shows. "You don't have to say much right now," he said, his voice level, "but anything you've kept, anything you think matters, now's the time." My hands were still in my sleeves, but I reached under the table slowly, slid my phone across, opened the audio app, and clicked into the folder I named something boring so no one would check. I played the clip of my father's voice saying, "Once she's out, we're free," and I didn't blink once. The officer listened with his head tilted, lips pressed together like he didn't want to interrupt even the quiet parts. When it ended, he didn't look at me right away. He just sat there, thinking, then reached for his notebook after all. "We're going to log this," he said, "and I'm going to need you to walk me through what you've heard, who Mara is, anything you've got." I told him about the overheard calls, the late-night whispers, the way Dad always paused when he realized I was in the room. "He didn't just want me gone," I said, "he planned it." From down the hall, I heard my father's voice rise again, rough and defensive, calling out words like misunderstanding and exaggeration, but they didn't echo the same way they used to. They just sounded tired. The officer gave me a bottle of water and stepped out, leaving the door cracked. I sat in that quiet room with my phone screen still glowing, my body finally catching up to everything my mind already knew. The worst part wasn't that he said it. It was how easily it came out. Like he'd been waiting for an excuse to let me go. The hallway outside the interview room was buzzing low, radios squawking in short bursts, voices too hushed to understand. I sat still, back straight, eyes fixed on the corner of the table like it might open a door if I stared long enough. When the officer came back, he was holding my phone like it was something fragile, something heavier than it should have been. "You said this folder's got more recordings?" he asked, and I nodded, fingers tightening in my lap. He tapped the screen, let it play, and for a moment, the air changed. It wasn't mine anymore. It was his. The audio clicked in rough, started mid-call. My father's voice thick with exhaustion and impatience. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't help. It's like she's just there to remind me what I lost." I felt my breath catch, not because I hadn't heard it before, but because it sounded so different in someone else's hands. She's not even mine, really, he continued, just leftover skin from something that ended. The officer stopped the recording, didn't say anything for a few seconds. His mouth opened, then closed again, like he was deciding what words wouldn't make this worse, which ones would make me stay upright. We're going to document this carefully, he said, more to the recorder than to me, but I need to ask, have you ever told anyone else about this? A teacher, counselor, anyone? I shook my head slowly, not because I didn't trust anyone, but because I didn't know how to name something that never left marks. He makes it sound like I imagined everything, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. But then when I record it, it's all right there. The officer nodded once, then scribbled something I couldn't read. I didn't ask what he wrote. Another voice called from the hall, Detective Langley? You might want to hear this, and he stood up fast, handed me back the phone with more care than I expected. You sit tight, Ray, he said, then pulled the door closed behind him. I sat there staring at the chipped edge of the table, hearing things I hadn't recorded, memories that weren't saved anywhere. The time he told the social worker I had episodes. The time he signed a form that said I might be unsafe around small children. The way people looked at me afterward, like I came with a warning. The door opened again, and it wasn't Langley who stepped in, it was an older officer, one with tired eyes and a voice like gravel. You Ray? He asked, and when I nodded, he leaned against the wall like he wasn't in a rush. One of the guys we picked up is talking. Said your father paid him. Said this whole thing was staged to make you look like a problem. I didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at the edge of his jacket sleeve like it might tell me something more. You hearing me? He asked again, and I nodded once. He kept talking, slower this time. Said your dad told him exactly how to scare you. Said there'd be a payout once CPS showed up and pulled you out of the house. My throat felt tight, like swallowing would tear something, but I asked, did they believe him? The officer shrugged lightly, not unkindly. He knew too much. Exact times. Phrases your dad said. Details you wouldn't guess. I looked down at the phone in my hand, still open on the screen. There's one more, I said, unlocking the last clip, the one I hadn't played for anyone yet, the one I saved for certainty. In the recording, it was late, his voice barely above a whisper, like he knew I was close by. After this, she's not my problem, he said. Let them take her, let her go into some system, maybe she'll land with people who can stand her face. And then silence, except for the sound of him exhaling like he'd just handed something off, like he'd finally rid himself of something heavy. I paused the clip, not because I couldn't hear more, but because the officer across from me looked like he'd heard enough. We're going to keep you safe, he said quietly. He stood, said someone would come walk me to a different room, something more private. I nodded again, my hands shaking, not with fear but with something colder, something more like finality. As he opened the door, my father's voice echoed faintly down the hallway, still arguing, still spinning the same tired story. She's unstable. She's not right in the head. She always makes things up. But that night, for the first time, someone else had heard what I'd been hearing all along. And the truth didn't need me to explain it anymore. It played itself, word by word, all on record. The room they moved me to was smaller, softer somehow, a lamp in the corner giving everything a warm tint, and for a moment I wished the whole night had taken place here instead of where it actually began. Detective Langley came in holding a thin folder, tapping the edge with his finger like he wasn't sure how to start. One of the men wants to talk to you, he said, voice quiet enough that it didn't echo, and I felt my stomach twist, not from fear, but from how quickly everything seemed to be shifting, like floorboards settling after a storm. They didn't bring him close, just opened the blinds between the rooms, letting me see him through the glass. He sat hunched over the table, wrists cuffed, eyes darting around until they landed on me, and something in his face softened, like he recognized I wasn't the reason he was here. I didn't know she was a kid, he said, raising his voice slightly, leaning forward as if speaking through the partition. He didn't tell us that part, all right? Langley nodded, motioning for him to continue, while I stayed still, hands folded tight in my lap. The man swallowed hard, glanced at the camera in the corner, then back toward me. He said it needed to look real, he muttered, like she lost it, like she couldn't handle being scared. His foot tapped under the table, restless and irregular. Told us what words to use, how loud to be, how to push things so she'd panic, said that'd help his case. I felt my throat tighten as he added, he gave us your name too, said you were easy to rattle. Something in the way he said it made the air feel like water, slow and heavy. Langley slid a paper toward him, asking, how did he contact you the first time? The man rubbed his face, exhaling sharply. Online, he answered, through some group thing, said he needed actors, said it was for a custody situation, said the kid was dangerous. I blinked at that word, dangerous, tasting how ridiculous it sounded coming from someone who didn't know me at all. He said he couldn't do it himself, the man went on, said it'd look too obvious if he tried to scare her alone, said we just needed to break in and make noise. Langley's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even as he asked, did he ever say why he wanted her out? The man shook his head, eyes flickering. Just said she was in the way, he murmured, said once she was taken, he'd finally breathe again. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, but a kind of clarity, like hearing the final piece of a story I already half understood. He told us not to touch her, the man added quickly, said hurting her would ruin everything, said fear was the point. I stared at the floor, letting the words settle. When they escorted him out, Langley looked at me through the glass like he wasn't sure what part of that to address first. You all right? He asked, pulling the chair closer to me as he returned to the room. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. This isn't on you, he said gently, leaning forward with his hands clasped between his knees. Every piece of this came from him, every step. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes, and he didn't flinch or look away, just waited for whatever I had left to say. I kept thinking maybe I misunderstood, I whispered, or maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded, maybe if I just did better, he'd stop talking about me like I wasn't standing right there. Langley nodded slowly, giving me time to breathe between each thought. People don't plan things like this by accident, he said, his tone steady, and children don't imagine recordings or hired break-ins. The lamp hummed softly in the corner, filling the silence that settled between us, warm in a way the rest of the night hadn't been. Outside the door, someone called his name, quick and urgent, and he stood, telling me he'd be right back. I folded my arms on the table, leaning into them as footsteps moved around the hallway, voices carrying pieces of conversations I couldn't catch. For the first time since the window shattered, I let myself sit all the way down into the moment, not running from it, not trying to figure out what came next, just breathing slow and steady. Because everything he'd tried so hard to hide was finally out where other people could see it, and I didn't have to hold it alone anymore. By morning, the police station smelled like old coffee and cold paper, the kind of quiet that hums just under conversation. A woman from family services sat across from me, hair pinned back, soft voice wrapped in something firm. You won't be going back there, she said, her hand resting near mine on the table, not touching, just steady. We've arranged a temporary placement, just until we understand what else you might need. I nodded slowly, watching the steam rise from the cup in front of me, trying to understand what it meant to be moved without packing your own things. They didn't take me past him, but I saw his shadow through the glass of a door left ajar, pacing, then sitting, then rising again. Someone was reading him his rights, voice calm and practiced, and, for a second, I thought I'd feel something sharp, something like anger or release, but what came instead was a quiet I hadn't known I could carry. The words he said to strangers had returned to him now, printed and recorded and filed in labeled folders, his voice playing back through speakers he couldn't unplug. I turned away from the window, let the door swing shut. The foster home wasn't far, just past the intersection where we used to stop for gas on Sundays. A woman named Elise met me at the door, eyes tired but kind, her sweater sleeves pulled halfway down her hands. You can have the room at the end of the hall, she said, motioning gently. It's got a window that sticks sometimes, but the heat works fine. I followed her without speaking, my bag light, my steps heavier, the hallway warmer than I expected. The room smelled like clean blankets and lemon detergent, and I stood just inside it for a while before sitting down. Dinner was quieter than I was used to, but not empty. Elise stirred soup on the stove while her son, Milo, sorted pencils by color at the table, humming something I didn't recognize. "You can eat now or later, up to you," she said without turning around, and the way she left space in the sentence made it feel like something I hadn't been offered before. I nodded, pulled out a chair, and sat slowly, watching steam rise from the bowl she placed in front of me. "Thank you," I said, almost too softly to hear, but she smiled anyway. Back at the station, Langley called that night, just once, just long enough to let Elise know they'd found more. Another message thread, more planned language, a calendar marked with a fake custody evaluation. I didn't need the details, didn't ask for them, but hearing her repeat his words, "she'll fold under pressure," made something in my chest tighten. Elise looked at me carefully after she hung up, then said, "He won't be able to rewrite this now, Ray." I nodded, more to myself than to her, because whatever version of me he'd built in other people's heads had started to fall apart. At school, I didn't say much. Mrs. Halverson pulled me aside that first morning back, her face pinched but kind. "Take what time you need," she said, pressing a hall pass into my hand, even though I hadn't asked to leave. People stared, but not cruelly, more like they didn't know where to place me anymore. I sat through the day with my head low, my hands still, my phone in my lap. The app one used to record him was still open, still showing timestamps, still holding all those late-night sentences he thought no one heard. It wasn't until the next week that I got called into the counselor's office, the door soft behind me, the chair too big. She spoke carefully, as if anything too sharp might set something off. "There's been a court date set," she said, her hands folded just above the file with my name. "You don't have to go unless you want to." I didn't answer right away, just looked out the window behind her desk, at the parking lot where parents waited with engines running. "I think I'll stay here," I said, and she didn't ask me to explain what I meant. That night, back at Elise's, I stood by the window in the small room at the end of the hall, looking out into the quiet street where porch lights flickered and nothing moved too fast. I didn't feel safe, not completely, but I felt separate, and that was something. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number I didn't answer. I let it sit there on the desk, face down, until the light stopped blinking. I pulled the blanket over my shoulder and lay back, breathing slow, and for the first time in a long time, there wasn't a voice in my head trying to make me disappear.